You are listening to the Cookbook Love Podcast with Maggie Green, episode number 265.
Welcome to the Cookbook Love Podcast, a podcast that celebrates cookbook readers, buyers, collectors, writers, and clubs. And now your host, cookbook author, culinary dietitian, and cookbook writing coach, Maggie Green.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Cookbook Love Podcast. How is everybody doing today? Welcome to October, the first podcast episode of this month. We've got a lot of great interviews coming up this month with book writers and cookbook authors. Very excited about that. But today you get to hear from me, a solo show. We're going to talk a little bit about the number one secret you need to have to start to write recipes for your cookbook. So if you're a home cook or you want to write a cookbook, but you don't know where or how to start, then this episode is for you. And if you are not interested in writing a cookbook, but you want to hear what I have to say about this, of course, you can continue to listen and tune in, because we are going to talk about a mindset shift that needs to take place if you want to become a cookbook writer and go on to become a cookbook author through getting your cookbook published. But before we get started, I wanted to ask you all, if you are listening to this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, to please hop on over to the ratings and reviews and leave us a rating. And if you would like to leave a review, that would be helpful also. I often hear from many podcast listeners via email. I just recently received an email from a listener who wanted permission to use a recipe technique that I talked about in one of my cookbooks. And of course, I said yes, and I would gladly give her permission for that. She's going to credit me and my book, Kentucky Fresh Cookbook. And she's writing a tribute cookbook for her 80-year-old mother, and they are having a get-together early in 2024. So I applaud her for continuing to work through that project and reaching out to me for permission, and also for the ways the show has helped her with her self-publishing project. I'm happy to hear that it has, and grateful to her for writing in. So I assume that if you are, again, interested in writing a cookbook of your own, you love to cook or bake. Maybe you're known in your family or at work or in your neighborhood or community for being the good food person. You're always the one they can count on to prepare some good food. But you cook or bake without measuring. This is very, very common. You throw things together in a whirl, you make a meal and a dash, and you don't really take the time to write things down. You make cooking and baking look very easy, and you also are someone that people turn to if they want to have something good for the party or the family dinner. But you then are asked for recipes. People say, can I have your recipe for something? And you have nothing to give them. So how do you go from being a passionate cook or baker to a person who can share recipes when people ask for them? Recipes that are written out or typed out, and you can share them either in an email, you can share them in a text message. You could maybe even share them on social media with your community. How do you become the kind of person that can do that? So the first thing you have to know is that in order to become a cook or baker, passionate cook or baker like you are, who has a system for note-taking while you cook and a way that you can turn your cooking into a written recipe, the number one secret is you have to start to see your cooking and baking as the very first step in the process. The awareness that you have already taken the first step in being a recipe and cookbook writer is really very important. And you have got the first step licked. If there is someone who wants to write a cookbook and they're not a passionate cook or baker, the only other option they have, which is possible, is to get contributed recipes from other people. And this actually happened with one of the students in my cookbooks in KDP this summer. She loved to cook and bake, but she always relied on other people's recipes. So the book that she published for her family was gathering family recipes together from other people and taking the time to put them all together. So assuming that that is not the kind of project you want to do, I just want you to sit back and be aware that step number one and where you need to start, you have already started it. You are the passionate cook or baker that people want recipes from. And then number two, you need to see yourself as the cook or baker who has something that people want, something that people desire. You have to give yourself credit for this. They would not be asking for your recipes if they did not think that your recipes were worth asking for. And the third thing is, and this is where the real shift starts to happen in our day-to-day life when we want to write recipes in a cookbook, you need to see your kitchen as your laboratory for wonderful and delicious recipe creation. And when you step into your kitchen and you are going to work on some recipes, creating some recipes, you're stepping into your lab. And you're becoming a cook that not only cooks, but learns how to document what they're doing and decides they're going to set up a system for keeping track of their measurements and the work that they do. So imagine you're a cook and you are in your kitchen, let's say 4 times a week, and you're at least creating one recipe every time you're in there. Maybe even more than one, but we'll just go with one so that we have a minimum amount. That's 4 recipes a week that you could be documenting, or 16 recipes a month that you could be documenting, or almost 50 recipes in 90 days that you can be documenting. And that is more than enough to help you decide what the concept for your cookbook might be. It's more than enough to provide a sample chapter for a publisher in a cookbook proposal. It's more than enough to share a recipe a week with a community. If you start a Substack newsletter or you have a blog or you want to share your recipes on social media, you are already cooking and baking more than enough to share with your people. And they are waiting for your recipes. And all that's really standing in between what you've got already going on in your kitchen and what your readers and community wants is seeing your kitchen as a laboratory and taking time to get a notebook and a pen and slow down and write down what you're putting in the food, document the process of what you're putting together, and take some time at your computer to type that up, and you have version 1 of your recipe. Now, there's lots of intricacies with recipe writing when it comes to special diets. If you're modifying for sodium, maybe you're trying to cut out certain things. But really, the number one thing that we need to do is, if we cook and bake all the time, is set up and organize a system for documenting the cooking and baking that we're already doing. And this is exactly what I did when I wrote my first cookbook. And you've maybe heard me tell the story, but I, for some reason, wrote down everything I cooked or baked in this little journal that I had. And when I went to write the proposal for my first cookbook, I decided to make it a seasonal cooking journey through a Kentucky year. And because I had written everything down and documented it in a notebook, I had the outline for my cookbook. I had the recipe list for my cookbook. And all I had to do then, and it wasn't, I'm not saying all like it was such an easy thing to do, but what I had to do then was just fill in the missing pieces, which was expanding out and writing the recipes. The journey, and it's a lot more about the journey to getting this book written. This is the fun part. This is where we get to enjoy ourselves. This is where we have something that we know that people want. So here's the final comment for this particular episode. If people are asking you for your recipes, you know that you're a good cook or baker, and they're wanting you to write down what you cook or bake. But if you're not doing that, then you need to start to see yourself as a cook or baker that has something to offer. You have something that people want. You need to start seeing your kitchen as a laboratory for the work that you're doing. I want you to imagine that you could create 50 new recipes written down and documented in the next 90 days. Say that's by the end of December or the beginning of January 2024. People are waiting for your work. And the only thing that's standing between getting that finished and what you're already capable of doing in the kitchen is just slowing down and writing down and documenting what you cook or bake with a notebook and a pen. Or if you want to take notes on your phone or on a tablet or on your laptop while you're cooking, I tend to prefer notebooks if I'm in the kitchen. If you're really not wanting to write anything while you're cooking, open up the the recording app on your phone and talk about your recipe while you're cooking it. That's called like a dictation of what you're cooking. And in Microsoft Word, you can upload audio files and it will type a transcript for you. And you can have your recipe typed out that way for you to edit and start to get version 1 recorded. You are a cook or baker that has what people want if they are asking you for recipes. So I hope that this perhaps provided a little bit of motivation for you to know that you have already started your journey if you want to write a cookbook. If people are asking for your recipes, and the next step is documenting what you're actually cooking or baking. So that is it for today's short and sweet episode of the Cookbook Love podcast. This is your host, Maggie Green, and until next time, have a great day and keep loving your cookbooks.
Thanks for listening to the Cookbook Love podcast. You can find out more information at www.cookbooklove.co.